Long before the dust of war covered the red soil of Ife, the Yoruba called it the beginning of all things. Ife was no ordinary city. It was the cradle of the Yoruba civilization, the sacred land where Oduduwa was said to have descended to begin the story of a people. Ife carried pride, history, and power. Every Yoruba king traced his root back to this land. It was the spiritual heart of a nation. But history, like fire, burns with both light and destruction. Within the womb of Ife's greatness, another story was waiting, the story of Mo-da-ke-ke. The Mo-da-ke-ke people were not outsiders in the sense of strangers, they were Yoruba too. But their journey into Ife's land began in blood, migration, and survival. When the Oyo Empire, once the mightiest of the Yoruba kingdoms, began to crumble in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, waves of war spread across Yorubaland. The Fulani Jihad from the north broke Oyo's backbone, and Yoruba towns became battlegrounds. Refugees fled in every direction, seeking shelter, land, and peace. Among these refugees were the people who would become known as Mo-da-ke-ke. They settled on the outskirts of Ife, in fertile land that stretched toward modern-day Osun State. They were welcomed at first, for Ife was an ancient city with space to spare, and unity was needed in times of crisis. The Mo-da-ke-ke built homes, tilled the soil, and grew in number. Their drums beat at night, their farms stretched wide, and their warriors carried the memory of Oyo's might. But with growth came tension. And with tension came war. The root of the Ife and Mo-da-ke-ke problem was not one single event. It was like a pot of soup where many ingredients boiled together: land, politics, economics, pride, and identity. The Mo-da-ke-ke, strong farmers, expanded rapidly. Their population increased, and their farms spread across lands the Ife considered theirs by ancestral right. The Ife saw themselves as landlords, the original children of Oduduwa, and expected loyalty, tribute, and respect. The Mo-da-ke-ke, proud descendants of Oyo warriors, did not see themselves as tenants but as people who had earned their space through sweat and struggle. This difference in identity sowed mistrust. To the Ife, Mo-da-ke-ke was like a tenant who refused to pay rent. To the Mo-da-ke-ke, Ife was like a landlord who would never be satisfied. By the early 19th century, this mistrust turned into open hostility. Land disputes became fights. Political dominance in the region became a contest. And soon, the Yoruba civil wars, wars that ravaged the land for almost a century, dragged Ife and Mo-da-ke-ke into repeated battles. The first major Ife and Mo-da-ke-ke conflict began around 1835. The collapse of Oyo Empire had sent many Oyo refugees southwards, and Mo-da-ke-ke became a powerful settlement. But Ife chiefs, watching their land occupied by newcomers, feared being swallowed. Clashes broke out. At first, they were raids, farms destroyed, markets burned, blood spilled in the night. But soon, it became organized war. The Mo-da-ke-ke, trained in the Oyo tradition of cavalry and warfare, were fierce fighters. The Ife, equally proud, fought to defend their ancestral soil. For decades, battles raged. Thousands died, towns were burned, and the once holy land of Ife became stained with blood. Yorubaland as a whole was already fractured by the wider Yoruba civil wars, Ibadan against Ije, Egba against Dahomey, and so on, and the Ife and Mo-da-ke-ke conflict became one of the deadliest chapters in this dark age. The wars between Ife and Mo-da-ke-ke did not happen in isolation. The rise of Ibadan as a military superpower in the 19th century made things more complicated. Ibadan recruited Mo-da-ke-ke warriors into its army. To the Ibadan generals, Mo-da-ke-ke fighters were valuable allies. To the Ife, it was betrayal. The Ife accused the Mo-da-ke-ke of siding with outsiders against their hosts. This further deepened hatred. Ife chiefs lobbied other Yoruba towns against Mo-da-ke-ke, painting them as aggressive settlers who wanted to dominate their landlords. The Mo-da-ke-ke, on the other hand, felt betrayed by Ife's refusal to accept them as equals. By the mid-19th century, war had become the language of both towns. People were displaced, villages destroyed, and families broken. The once shared festivals and markets between Ife and Mo-da-ke-ke became impossible. Suspicion reigned where trust once lived. By the late 19th century, the British had begun to extend their shadow over Yorubaland. They watched the endless Yoruba wars with both interest and impatience. Endless wars disrupted trade, weakened towns, and made the region unstable for colonial ambitions. In 1886, after decades of bloodshed, a peace treaty was attempted, the famous Peace Treaty of 1886, brokered under colonial influence. The treaty ordered Mo-da-ke-ke to relocate away from Ife. For a while, there was calm. But it was not true peace, only a wound covered without healing. When the British finally colonized Yorubaland in the early 20th century, they redrew boundaries, imposed new chiefs, and created artificial structures of governance. But instead of solving the Ife and Mo-da-ke-ke rivalry, their policies often deepened it. The allocation of land, the recognition of chiefs, and the collection of taxes all became new weapons in an old war. One might have thought that with independence in 1960, Nigeria would bury old hatreds. But history does not die so easily. By the 1980s and especially the 1990s, Ife and Mo-da-ke-ke clashes erupted again, this time with modern weapons. Land ownership, chieftaincy titles, and local government boundaries fueled the conflict. When the military government in Nigeria split local councils, both Ife and Mo-da-ke-ke fought bitterly over which town deserved its own administration. Violence followed. Between 1997 and 2000, one of the bloodiest episodes occurred. Houses were torched, thousands displaced, and many killed. Both towns suffered greatly. Mothers wailed, children were orphaned, and the once shared Yoruba identity seemed completely broken. But war, no matter how fierce, must one day tire. By the early 2000s, the cry for peace became louder than the drums of war. Traditional rulers, Yoruba elders, and the government of Osun State all stepped in. Dialogues were held. Palaces opened their doors to reconciliation. One of the turning points came when Oni of Ife, Oba Okunade Sijuade, and Mo-da-ke-ke leaders agreed that endless war would only destroy their people. The government created new local councils, giving Mo-da-ke-ke recognition and a sense of identity. Gradually, resettlement programs were introduced, and peace committees formed. The last major clashes subsided in the early 2000s. Though scars remained, a fragile peace took root. The story of the Ife and Mo-da-ke-ke wars is not just about land or power. It is about the danger of mistrust, the poison of pride, and the cost of unresolved conflict. For over 150 years, two towns of the same people, the same Yoruba blood, fought as if they were eternal enemies. And yet, beneath the ashes, they are brothers. Their festivals, their language, their gods, their ancestors, all tied to the same root. Today, many Ife and Mo-da-ke-ke youths marry each other, study together, and dream of a future where their history is no longer a curse but a lesson. The wars ended not because one side conquered the other, but because both sides realized that only peace could give life. The cradle of Yoruba civilization, Ife, could not continue to spill the blood of its children. From the first clashes of the 19th century to the bloody crises of the 1990s, the Ife and Mo-da-ke-ke wars stretched like a shadow across Yoruba history. The causes, migration, land, politics, identity, remind us how human pride can turn brothers into enemies. The colonial interference, the manipulations of power, and the failure to resolve disputes early made the wars last longer than they should have. But the story also ends with hope. Ife and Mo-da-ke-ke still stand today, side by side. Their people farm, trade, worship, and live again. Their leaders meet in peace. And though memories remain painful, the future holds the promise of healing. The Ife and Mo-da-ke-ke wars teach us this, that history must not be forgotten, but also that hatred must not be carried forever. The land of Oduduwa, the cradle of a people, must remain a place of life, not death.